Welcome back, everybody. We are going to be doing a deep dive into cylinders. The next few videos in this series will cover how to throw the perfect cylinder, tips and tricks on how to be the most successful, cylinder throwing training, and end on how to improve your throwing to make larger and taller cylinders with more clay. In this week's video, we are going to cover insert number here, tips and tricks on how to throw the perfect cylinder. So stick around to find out what they are. So the original video was supposed to be 32 minutes long, but I decided to cut it in half and release them in part 1 and part 2. So that way they are a little shorter at 16 minutes each, give or take. If you would have rather liked it as a full 32-minute video, let me know in the comments below so I can keep those longer content videos. Or if you like them shorter like this and released weekly, then also please let me know in the comments because I want to know what you guys think so I can then make adjustments for future videos. And the last thing is, if you want to skip around and find the specific tips, just click on the timestamp in the description below. That way you don't have to watch the whole thing because I know sometimes I talk on and on and on, and I'm going to be working on that. So without further ado, here's part 1 on how to create the perfect cylinder, covering the first 6 tips. So cylinders. In my opinion, this is the most important technique to learn when you're learning pottery on the wheel. And the reason for that is everything that you make stems from a cylinder. If it's a bowl, if it's a cup, if it's a vase, you all start off with a cylinder and then you shape it. So this is the foundation that everyone needs to learn, and the sooner you're able to throw an even-walled cylinder from top to bottom, the sooner you can start throwing bigger, taller, and you can start pushing yourself to throw more intricate things. Now, it may seem really easy, but I'm going to go over some tips and tricks to help you guys, especially if you're struggling, on how to improve your cylinder throwing and how to throw one to try to get it to a nice even wall from top to bottom. So we're going to go over some tips and tricks. Now, my number one tip, looks like 11. My number one tip I have for everyone that is learning the pottery wheel: throw what you're comfortable with. Before you move on to throwing something bigger or larger, get comfortable with the clay weight that you started off with. You should be able to center it fairly quickly. You should be able to open and pull the walls fairly fast. And you should be able to make your piece, hopefully within 30 minutes. Now, if you're still struggling with that clay weight, you may not be ready to start moving on to throwing slightly heavier. Because from my experience, when students start throwing, the number one thing they want to throw, I keep doing 11, number one thing they want to throw is large, tall vases. But they don't understand that the more you throw with, the heavier the weight, the more exponential the difficulty becomes. Because if you can't even center that amount, then throwing that amount and pulling that amount will be even harder. So my number one tip, throw what you're comfortable with. Tip number 2 I have is have an end goal weight in mind, but don't try to throw it right away. So for this example, let's say 5 pounds is my end goal weight. I want to be able to throw a 5-pound cylinder and make it into a vase. But right now I only can throw and center 2 pounds. So instead of going from 2 straight to 5, that's going to be a lot of difficulty in between that spectrum. So instead of that, go from 2 and increase the 2 pounds to 2.5. If you're okay with that and you can throw it fairly easily, then increase it to 3 pounds, and then 3.5, and then 4, and then 4.5, and so on until you hit your end goal. And by gradually stepping up the clay weight, your body can get used to that clay amount in small increments. So I treat it very similar to weightlifting. If you're trying to get stronger, you're not going to lift the heaviest weight. You're going to start smaller, you're going to do more repetitions, and then you increase it a little heavier, a little more repetitions, and so on until you hit your end goal. And once you hit your end goal, then you move that to the next goal, which will maybe be 10 pounds. And that's tip number 2. So in this video, I'm going to be throwing 1.5 pounds, and that is just to kind of go over the rest of the tips and tricks I have that are going to be sprinkled throughout this video. And so whenever you are ready to start throwing your perfect cylinder, tip 1 is start with your clay weight that you're comfortable with, and once you're okay with that, increase it and cover step 2. So let's go ahead and grab the clay and let's talk about more tips and tricks. So the reason I picked 1.5 pounds is this is usually the amount that most people start off with. From my students, they normally start off with 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds, or roughly the size of your fist or slightly larger. And most people, you're usually around this big. Now, granted, you may be bigger, so you'd probably start off with a larger amount. But for this video's sake, I'm going to start off with 1.5 pounds, or 0.7 kilograms. Now for centering, all those things, those steps still apply. We're actually going to rock it to create a point, tap it down, and then start pushing the sides to get it stuck. And then start blending the edge so it doesn't lift up. So the centering portion will never change. Now things may change in terms of the way you do it, but we're still getting your piece centered before we start making it into your perfect cylinder. And because I forgot how many tips I've given you so far, I'm just going to put a counter up here with the tip number. And so this next tip is when you throw your cylinder and you're practicing a lot of cylinders, you want to make sure that your width that you throw is more or less consistent every time you throw, and every time you increase the weight, try to keep that width the same. And so the width that I aim for is slightly wider than the width of my hand from knuckle to knuckle. So my hand is about 3.5 inches wide. So when I throw this, I want to make this about 4 inches. Just enough for my hand to fit, but not too wide where I can't get it too tall. Because if you can't get it tall, you're not really training yourself when you pull. So when I center, I want to center this piece of clay roughly the same width. And right there, that looks pretty good. It can be a little wider at the bottom, which is perfect. So when I throw it up vertically, I want to try to maintain that width at the bottom. All right, so to dig, I like to keep my thumbs sideways and at a 90-degree angle, so I dig wide and deep at the same time. And then I'm digging until I reach my depth. Now for the training purposes, I recommend digging your bottom to about 1/4 inch thick, because it's good to cut this in half after you're done to see how thick your clay walls are. If you're planning to keep it, you could either do a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch, but with a 1/4 inch, you have more clay to pull up vertically, so you can get more training in. So in this case, I want it 1/4 inch. All right, and then when we open, the next tip that I have is setting up your cylinder for success. And so that's 2 parts, and that's part of opening to create a nice flat floor and to create a 90-degree angle where your floor meets your wall. And the main thing you want to set up is the bottom. You want your bottom to be as flat as possible from wall to wall, so that when you start your pulls, you can reach in at the bottom and squeeze the clay. Now, the interesting thing about these 2 cylinders, they're both thrown with the same amount of clay, which is 1 pound. However, because this base was not flat from wall to wall, I could not get my finger in there to pull this wall up as tall as this one. So when you put these together, they're roughly the same width. They're roughly the same thickness at the top, but they are definitely different in height. This one's almost double the height of this one. So when I mean set up your cylinder for success, make sure that your base is flat from wall to wall. This is going to help you set up your cylinder to then pull it up vertically, because when you do the pulls, you want your inside finger, which is your left hand usually, to be at the very bottom where the base of your clay meets the wall of your clay. And then your outside hand will be on the outside to apply pressure here. This one is not flat from wall to wall, and you can see that it slopes quite a bit. So I have no corner either, meaning I can't really push the clay and compress the clay as easily because my hand will ride the slope rather than push into the corner. So if I were to take a needle and draw on the piece, you are losing out on that much clay. So when you open, I recommend for beginners, have your thumbs in the inside, pointer fingers on the outside, and you move your thumbs towards your pointer fingers at midnight. So this camera is a little offset. My midnight is here, my 3 o'clock's here. I shifted it so that you can see my pull hand a little better. From the overhead cam, you can see it a little better where my fingers and my thumbs are both at midnight. Now, if you are already okay with opening your well and can open it flat all the time, open it the way that you're comfortable with. But if you're still experimenting, trying to figure out what works best, try this. Thumbs at midnight, pointer fingers at midnight, and open and move your thumbs towards your pointer fingers. Now when you open, oftentimes your bottom or the very center where you dug is the deepest, and then it increases in thickness as it goes out towards your clay wall. So if that happens after your first initial opening, get your fingers back in there, left hand fingers, right hand finger, doesn't matter. Apply downwards pressure and then pull that wall towards you so that you can then reset the bottom to that same consistent thickness. And so whenever you are training or making cylinders, in this case, we're trying to make the perfect cylinder. You want to make sure that your bottom is nice and flat all the way through, and stop in between your movements to double check to make sure that it is consistent. Okay, so let's continue opening. And when you open, remember, you don't want to go deeper than you already have. You want to make sure that you are only expanding it to make it wider. Okay, so I'm going to soak up all the water on the inside. You can see that my clay got thicker as I went outwards, so I'm going to push down and pull that clay towards me again. I can add a little water so it stays nice and slick. And then now you can really see that nice vertical wall forming, and that leads into the second part of this tip, is making sure that you have a nice corner. So to set your corner to create that 90 degree so that when you pull, you can pull at the very bottom. So your initial setup, take your time, be patient so that you can then have enough clay to pull up from the bottom to get a nice flat floor. All right, so that created my flat bottom. And now let's talk about pulls going up. So pulls going up, normally your left hand is on the inside, right hand is on the outside. And the tip that I have for you is make sure that when you do the pull, your inside hand is higher than your outside hand. So I'm going to show you another clip on why that's important. So the reason why you want your hands at different heights when you pull up, where your inside is higher than your outside, is this allows you to have the most leverage. When you have your hands placed like that, your inside hand should be at the lowest point on the inside. Ideally, it should be where the floor meets your vertical wall. So this corner that we have hopefully have set. Your outside hand should be at the bottom where your clay wall meets the back. So ideally, you should not have a skirt here. It should be almost a vertical wall. And that allows you to compress the clay at the bottom and really pull that up. So the reason why it's good to have them offset, when your inside hand pushes the clay out, this creates a little undercut for your outside hand to then pull up. So your inside hand pushes out to create the undercut, your outside hand pushes in, and that creates more of an undercut. And you can see that the clay is starting to create this little curve or this S. And as you do your pull, your outside hand pushes that curve up into your inside hand, your left hand, and then your left hand distributes it vertically. And then when you get to the top, both fingers then meet each other, keep it there for a few seconds, and then release. So every pull you do should create extra height. So let's talk about that one more time. Left hand pushes out to create an undercut. Right hand pushes in to create another undercut. It creates this little S so that your outside hand, your right hand, can then pull this bump up. Your left hand will also do the same above it. And then when you do the pull, I'm just keeping this finger here so the wall stays more or less flat. You then lift and then bring that curve up the pot until you get to the very top. Moving on to the next step, pulling the walls. So left hand inside, right hand outside. My left hand's going to push out, my right hand's going to push in, and both hands rise. And when you start rising, make sure that they are rising at the same time, same amount of pressure as you go up. You don't want to just keep your inside hand against the clay wall at all times and only push with this, because as you do that, you end up doing a weird uneven pull, and that usually thins out the middle section of the wall, creating this thin spot that then can create buckle or twists. And I can show you that if that does happen. So instead, make sure you have one point of contact, inside hand, outside hand, one point of contact, and both hands move up at the same rate, and then your outside hand will catch up to the rim. Yeah, so it looks something like this. So push out, create an undercut, push in, create another undercut, and then pull up. And remember, as you rise, start releasing the pressure. When you get to the very top, leave your fingers there for a few seconds, let the clay catch up, and then release. Okay. And you may have thought and noticed that my cylinder is much wider than my wrist. So as I do my pulls, this is going to get slightly narrower because I'm going to be pushing that clay inward. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another pull. Left hand, push out. Right hand, push in. Both hands move up. Release the pressure as you rise. When you get to the very top, leave both hands there for a few seconds and then release. Okay. You're going to want to make sure that you compress your lip every once in a while. And so I like using the sponge and just draping it over the top. You can also do a finger compression where you support the inside and the outside with your left hand, and your right pointer finger applies downwards pressure like a parking gate, and you slowly round that area and then smooth. Okay. Before I start any other pulls, I want to look at my inside. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of how to create the perfect cylinder. In next week's video, we're going to cover the final 6 tips. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.